Good morning, everyone. Lots going on as usual. Today is Wednesday, November 19th, 2025, and I've got new information. New shit has come to light on the lab-grown meat. So Rebel News came out with a report yesterday, and they're saying lab-grown cloned meat. Lab-grown, something like that. And more information about live-born cloned animals. And I just think, man, I got to read you in on this because this has been a wild ride for me. This is just absolutely crazy. Why do they want to mess with the food so much? We've got our chocolate cereal. We've got our protein shakes. We've got our dairy. We could do better on dairy. We really could do better on dairy. So they're messing with food even more. And we've got to talk about that. And we will later in the show today. Epstein files to be released. The House and the Senate voted yesterday to release the files, and they've even made requests of banks and other places. So we'll get into that at the end of the show today. That's going to be interesting. I guess I was wrong. They're going to release these things anyway. Yeehaw! Buckle up. It's going to be fun. Why are there so many starving children in Canada, and why does the government need to pay for their lunch? It used to be when I was a kid that my parents were in charge of lunch, and if you were hungry at school, you might have there might be something there, but most of the time it would just be from somebody else's lunch who maybe gave you something they didn't like, right? If you were like, oh man, my parents forgot something or whatever. I had my dad deliver like Subway when I was a kid as well, so that was good because I forgot my lunch and he felt bad and he was out, and so he got me Subway. But like by and large, it wasn't the school's responsibility to feed the kids at school, regardless of what was happening. And the 80s weren't exactly an easy time, right? Like the 80s, I think, were in some ways more difficult than, or potentially more difficult for some people than even now, right? So it's a situation where I don't understand why the government is getting in on feeding starving children. And I mean, it seems like a grift. It seems like the homelessness thing. They're like, oh, we're going to help all these homeless people. And then 20 years later, billions of dollars later, all these people get rich being CEOs of homelessness. It's like Captain Hammer. I hate the homelessness problem, right? These CEOs of homeless charities and whatever, they get rich, but there's still more and more homeless because they're incentivized to continue the problem, because without the problem, there's no need for their job. So I don't know, man, like NATO, right? Like what is it you guys do here? Weren't you there around to counter the USSR? So what's going on with that? Anyway, starving children in Canada. Why is it the government's responsibility? It's like a grift. I feel like it's a grift. BC scraps EV sales mandate. The longer Trump stays, the worse it gets for the globalist plan. So Trump is getting in the way by making the economics of electric cars not make any sense by not allowing California and Ontario, well, California mostly, to mandate electric cars. And without that mandate, the car companies have no economic reason to switch over to electric, and so they will not do it. And so we are watching in real time the unwinding of the green agenda. It should be much faster, but I guess we're getting there. I don't know. And the Conservative Party of Canada, we've got to go back and talk about the budget. The Conservative Party of Canada wanted to pass this budget, and they hid behind the curtains in order to make that happen. Unbelievable. So there's lots to get to. Let's get to it first. Curtains for the Conservative Party of Canada. These guys are hiding behind curtains to make sure that this budget passes, and they're doing this because they feel like they can't risk a Carney majority, but they also can't risk the backlash if they were honest with their base. And none of that's good. And just because the polls say the Liberals are going to get a majority, these polling agencies are cracked, although the elections are rigged and the polling agencies basically forecast what is going to be shoved down our throats. Unfortunately, it's all rigged. David says, here's either Andrew Scheer or Scott Reid hiding behind the curtain during the budget vote to ensure that it passed. They sat out 2 MPs to make sure that the Liberals would have enough votes to get this thing passed, because strategically they're behind in the polls. And if we go to an election, they're worried the Liberals will get a slim majority. And yeah, that's all the hubbub. That's what people are saying. Mr. Sunshine Baby says, if it really was the strategy to not have an election right now, then why did the Conservatives vote against the budget? If you specifically wanted the budget to pass to avoid an election, why go through the trouble of making it look like you wanted to oppose it, but not fully? Let's all vote against it, but have 2 MPs abstain and 2 more hide behind the curtains until after the vote. Super weird. And Andrew Scheer comes out and votes no for it after he knows that the government, this is that happening. So comes out from behind the curtain. Oh, I was outside of the room for the vote. Can I vote now, everybody?
The honourable official opposition House leader has a point.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I had technical difficulty. I would like to vote no.
So from behind the curtain to, I had a technical difficulty. The curtain got me. And it was just, I was trying to walk forward, but I got in the way of the curtain. I got lost in the curtain. I couldn't see. And, the vote ended. And here I am. So no, now that the government won't fall. And that's what Table Salt says. Talk about keeping your options open. Oops, I wasn't in the room to vote. So now that I know how everyone else voted, I will vote no because it's safe and won't bring down the government. Right. That's what's going on here. Mr. Sunshine Baby says, when Jagmeet Singh blocked elections against Trudeau, he constantly said it was because of strategy. Right? Is this strategy, guys? You think so? Carney hasn't done anything. He failed on Trump. He failed on getting a deal. He failed on meeting any of Danielle Smith's demands by Grey Cup. Right? Grey Cup happened. No demands met. Extension from Danielle Smith. So yeah, that Mark Carney's doing so well. He's going to eke out a slim majority. He hasn't done anything. Not that it doesn't make sense, but give me a break. Time went on, his party got decimated, and he lost his job. I'm sure it's different this time, though, says Mr. Sunshine Baby. Yeah, sure. Here's Mr. Polyev shadowboxing, right? Because it's bullshit. He is responding to Desree. Desree says, Canada's living standards have sunk even lower than Britain's. No small feat, and Mark Carney's fingerprints are all over it. And Polyev says, Mark Carney is importing to Canada the same financial disaster that he caused in the UK as bank governor there. Wherever he shows up, inflation goes up, paychecks shrink, housing costs balloon, and living standards collapse. That's the cost of Carney. And Ed says, if you really believed that Mark Carney's budget is this bad, you probably should have made an effort to defeat it. Any reasonably intelligent outsider observer can see what you did. You wanted it to pass. You allowed it to pass. You had guys hiding behind the curtains in order to ensure that it passed. Oh, I was outside of the room. I was right there behind the curtain. You probably saw me, but don't answer that question. I'd like to vote no. Here is a reminder just how bad this budget is. And I know we did this reminder a little bit yesterday, but just in case a new viewer is showing up today, hello, new viewer, this is how bad the budget is. Here we go.
Budget 2025 comes with a whopping $78 billion deficit. Parliament's budget watchdog says that digging out of the hole will be harder than the Liberal government is letting on.
We think that the definition the government's used around capital investments is overly expansive. And in particular, they've thrown some things in there, some categories of spending, which other jurisdictions in other countries would not typically include.
Under Mark Carney, the budget is split into operational costs, day-to-day expenses like the salaries of public servants, versus capital investments, such as long-term funding for major projects. Despite the record deficit, the finance minister says the government will balance the operating side in 3 years and shrink the deficit to GDP ratio starting next year.
100% of our MPs opposed the costly Carney credit card.
100%? Ooh, I don't think so. 100%-ish. Like 80%. Mark Nixon says, Liberals, we've never been more united. Blanchette, each province is breaking apart. We're fracturing fast. Canada's not one nation anymore. It's 13 competing kingdoms under one collapsing flag. The Carney chaos rolls on. I fear that even if we do fracture badly in Canada, we'd be absorbed by the United States. It would be not very long before economically we just start behaving as a vassal of the United States, I think, as separate entities, right? Like if Ontario is no longer a part of Canada and Doug Ford is the leader, Lord help us. I mean, jeepers creepers, that would be a nightmare situation. But at least then we wouldn't be kowtowing to China at the provincial, municipal, and federal level. The federal level would just be gone. What would happen to all that debt? It'd be downloaded to the provinces, promise. Mark Nixon is sharing this, and here is Yves Blanchette talking about this. He says he thinks it's going to come back and bite them in the ass. It's pretty funny. Here we go.
Suggested that Mark Carney is a bit of a lemon, or Canadians bought a lemon with Mark Carney. Sounds like you're kind of ruling out or writing him off in terms of his abilities. Does that suggest that this party, your party, won't be comfortable working with the Liberals going forward?
Our party will say what it has always said, that we are promoting, protecting the interests of Quebec and the idea that we should make our own choices. I believe some other parts of the country are starting to have the same thinking. They refuse the possibility of having a support from us with very clear conditions, and then they refuse the possibility to go through the whole process with a partner up to the end of it. So they will live the same anxiety that we have seen this morning with the Prime Minister and Mrs. Joly and Mr. Champagne and who else. Because at each step of this long process, including the committee, they will have to start all over again because they were not good partners for anybody. They exploited the momentary weaknesses of everybody, and this is not how policy should be done. So I believe it will come bite their ass.
Yeah, there you go. It'll come bite their ass, says Yves Blanchette. Mark Nixon says, let's do our Gab of Governance Money Edition. And wasted money. And right after the budget passes, apparently we're going to send a butt ton of money to the European Space Agency. Mark Nixon says 24 hours after the catastrophic budget was approved, Canada announces a massive jump in funding to European Space Agency. I don't recall this line item in the budget, and I don't actually know how much is more than 500 million. Canada's investing more than 500 million. Well, I wonder how much it is. 528 million. Why not put 528 million? Way too much money. Imagine, oh, there it is, 500 million. Imagine if we had that money invested in Canada and no foreign nationals taking that money, but just having Canadians in Canada access that $500 million. Imagine what kind of difference that would make. But instead, we're going to send it to the European Space Agency. Right? Ryan says Canada's the only non-European country partnered in the European Space Agency, an arrangement that dates back to 1979. What an absolute waste of money. Yep, absolutely. Right? So budget passed, time to start spending more because we're not going to be held accountable for another year and stuff. Because do you think they're going to give us a budget in March 2026? I would be surprised. I think we're going to go even further in the red. In the red. I think things are going to be worse. They're going to spend more. They're going to use the justification of look at this balanced operating budget that we're approaching when really we're still in deficit because all spending is deficit spending right now because we don't have any damn money coming in. And so they're going to say that we're not in a situation of deficit. We're going to use that as a justification to borrow more, but we are still going to be in deficit and people are going to go along with it because what choice do we have at this point in time? What choice do we have? I'm asking. Thank you. Please leave the choices that we have in the comments. Thank you. Holly Doan says feds say they have, this is the Federal Agency Employment and Social Programs, I guess, say they have no numbers to show how many children have been fed under the National School Lunch Program, though spending is $228 million to date. Ministers have repeatedly claimed figures of 400,000 in praising programs as a success. Here is Jamil Giovanni. This is convincing me that he wants to be leader of the Conservative Party too. I think that there are a couple of potential leaders in the running for the Conservative Party after Pierre Poilievre is removed or loses the next election. Him, Jason Kenney, Danielle Smith, and there's one more. I've forgotten who the fourth one is, but there's certainly one more. I'll tell you after we listen to Jamil talk about the food lunch programs and what that means to Canada. Here we go.
The government put in their recent budget a commitment to fund a national school food program. Now, that probably sounds good to a lot of Canadians. So the government's helping kids get lunch because their kids go into school without food. It should frighten us that there aren't parents who can buy their own kids lunch. And we talk about what needs to change outside of government policy. It is the idea that the government shouldn't be your daddy. The government shouldn't be your mother, right? We have families, and families should be strong enough to provide for their children. And when they're not, that should break our hearts and make us weep. It should not be used as a justification for the government to have even more influence, even more input, even more control over our lives. I wish more Canadians were offended by the idea that the government wants to buy your kids lunch. Yeah. And the government is making it okay for you to not be able to provide your own children with food. That's a problem. But that is the cultural issue that we encounter. is that every time the government promises to do something for you that used to be done by your own family, that used to be done by your neighbor, that used to be done by your church or your temple, every time the government promises you something, we need to get back to a point where we ask the question, why? Why do they have to do it? And why do they get to spend our tax dollars doing us a favor and we're supposed to be grateful? Instead of saying to ourselves, no, we don't actually think that's the government's place. The government's place is not to take our money, do us a favor. The government should be facilitating a strong community and strong families and people who can stand on their own. And when they disagree with the government can say, I disagree with you, I'm not dependent on you, and I don't have to mimic your talking points or your virtue signaling. But the more
it's interesting. The government's trying to take our own money and feed 400,000 kids with $228 million. And I don't think they should. And I'm the bad guy because I have a YouTube show that makes fun of all of the bad policies of our ridiculous and stupid government, right? And that's wild. Here is Patty Haydu talking about this 30 seconds. It's all talking points. She's reading it off a piece of paper. And Daryl says, why does Canada have so many starving kids across the country? And Patty Haydu says, the school food program is helping to feed so many starving kids across the country and assisting families during a difficult time. It is not the government's job. And if there's no trucks, if there's no food trucks coming and the grocery stores are broken down, then it might be the government's job to distribute food in a way, in like an emergency situation where everything else is broken down and without it, people will starve. That's maybe something entirely different. But in a regular functioning society, you shouldn't have mass starvation of children to the point where the government needs to intervene in an emergency for lunches every day, right? If you want to provide that as a service, okay. But why is the federal government doing it? Education is provincial. It's not federal, right? So like these programs should not be federally quarterbacked. It should be provincial. And the federal government shouldn't be putting money towards it. It should be provincial. And if the province wants it, they should tell their provincial government, not the feds. The feds are buying their way into this, just like they buy their way into healthcare. Oh, we're doing good. How many starving children across Canada? If there's so many starving children across Canada, why are we wholesale importing the Middle East? Anybody? No? It makes no sense. Oh, we have all sorts of problems. We can't even feed ourselves and clean drinking water for First Nations. Guffaw. But yeah, come to Canada, the Middle East. We'd love to put you up in a hotel. This is the genuine, honest, straightforward policy of our government. Why? Why? Here's Patty Haydu.
This budget is a game changer for families across the country, whether it's the school nutrition program, which I know these Conservatives like to talk down, that's feeding hungry mouths in my riding of Thunder Bay Superior North and all across the country, or early learning and childcare program that's reducing fees. Listen to this, Mr. Speaker. ELCC has taken a huge mental and financial load off our family, particularly during these times. That's from a parent, Mr. Speaker. You can't beat that.
Yikes. Delusional and out of touch. Doesn't quite even cover it anymore. Sprinter Press says Hungary's Orban breaks down von der Leyen's plea for an additional $135 billion for Ukraine. Euros, excuse me, not dollars. And Orban says, von der Leyen says, has once again asked the member states for additional funds to finance Ukraine in the war. What exactly does this mean? The president of the commission is asking for nothing less than an additional $135 billion over 2 years. This is 65% of Hungary's Hungary's annual economic output, 7 years of pensions from all Hungarian pensioners, and nearly 3/4 of the EU's annual budget. An astronomical sum that does not exist today. It simply does not exist. And so the other day I was talking about how when you borrow money, you bring money from the future production into now. So like you're gonna buy a house, you get a mortgage, you borrow $1 million these days, but it used to be like $100,000, and that $100,000 you'd paid back over 25 years at agreed upon terms. And so that makes $25,000 real today, or $100,000 real today, for your agreement to pay it back over the 25 years. And so this $135 billion that she's demanding over 2 years makes that real today, with the promise of Europe or the EU paying it back over the next however long the agreed upon terms are, right? That money wouldn't exist other than borrowing it on the back of the promise that the EU is going to pay it back, right? And so that's my understanding of it anyway. And so this robs people blind. because you don't understand. Like, this is tax agreements and all sorts of agreements that now this money for people in the EU cannot go towards their social programs, right? This is an astronomical sum that does not exist today. Yeah. So what's going to happen? People are going to go into debt for Ukraine. For what? You got me? Why? Julian Assange says Chrystia Freeland, a prominent Canadian politician, and Timur Minj, an associate. I'm sorry, this is the worst possible name that I could come in contact with. Anyway, apologies, Timur. I'll do my best. An associate of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky are mentioned together in recent news regarding Canada's relations with Ukraine and allegations of corruption. The connection primarily stems from reports in social media discussions surrounding Timur's alleged involvement in Ukrainian corruption scandals and Canada's support for Ukraine, particularly during Freeland's tenure as Canada's former Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister. Key points regarding their association: Zelensky associate Timur has been identified in various reports as a secretive associate of President Zelensky. Corruption allegations: he is the alleged ringleader in a reported $100 million graft case in Ukraine, which has drawn significant media and political attention. Canadian context: discussion about him and the corruption case have appeared in the context of Canadian politics and foreign policy, particularly concerning financial aid and support to Ukraine, and whether Canadian officials, including Freeland, were aware of the situation. Freeland recently resigned from her ministerial positions in September 25. Following her resignation, she was appointed as the Prime Minister's special envoy for Ukraine's reconstruction. The timing of these events has led to speculation and discussion in some circles linking her departure to the ongoing scrutiny of corruption in Ukraine and Timur's alleged role. Sorry, I was using his first name because I don't know how to say his last name, and it was just going to be bad every time I was going to attempt it. So his last name is not Timur. That's his first name. So apologies. But corruption abound. Ukraine, let's send more, right? And are we going to have any accounting of it? Right after we get those COVID criminals prosecuted. Right? Yeah, sure, it's going to happen any day now. Andy Lee says, you might be wondering how many access to information requests were filed by our subsidized multi-billion-dollar corporate media apparatus last year on the $15 billion Canada Growth Fund. One was filed. Do you know where your money is going? Because I don't. And Andy Lee is talking about this, which she gives the Canada Growth Fund is, she says, the more I read about the $15 billion Canada Growth Fund, the more insane it seems. Canada Growth Fund is managed by Canada Development Investment Corporation. The government's website lists 6 employees. Out of the $56.6 million in expenses for 24, the $43 million went towards compensation. They have an unknown number of staff, consultants, and lawyers. They have funded Brookfield projects in the past. So, yowza, right? So Andy Lee's found not a rabbit's hole, right? A hornet's nest. That's what I was looking for. And nobody seems interested in it. Isn't that interesting? I find all that interesting. And nobody's like Andy Lee. I have Andy Lee on my notifications. You can go into people's accounts and then you can click a little bell and they'll notify you whenever they've posted something new. So when you go into your notifications area, I get a little thing that says these people have posted. Andy Lee's never in that list, and I use that list all the time. Like that's how I stay on top of things, because the algorithm's terrible. So you have to make your own, right? But Andy Lee never shows up in my little algorithm. The only way I can see Andy Lee is if other people that she interacts with, I guess, or interacts with her, share her stuff that also cross over with me. Isn't that weird? It's a strange thing. And I mean, same thing happens to me. Also, I don't know if her name populated when I typed it in, but there's a whole bunch of services where names don't populate, all sorts of crazy stuff. What are we at? 24 minutes. I thought 17 minutes for sure. Okay, we got to say goodbye to the stream. I'll tell you